Welcome to Nasdaq TradeTalks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq. We're coming to you live from Mainnet 2023 in New York City. Joining me for this segment, we have Paul Veradittakit. I hope I got this right, Paul. Managing Partner at Pantera Capital, yes, to discuss the most compelling areas for investment in the crypto space. Paul, it's great to have you with us. Welcome to
Thank you for having me.
What investment strategies are compelling for investors in the crypto space right now?
Look, I mean, we started investing into crypto and blockchain probably earlier than anybody else. We're one of the first institutional capital. We've been doing it since 2013. So we've seen a lot of bull markets, we've seen a lot of bear markets, and starting in 2020, 2021, the valuations were really high. Now that the valuations are much lower, there's a few different things that we're doing. Number one, like liquid cryptocurrencies, tokens that are already on exchanges and on the public markets. They are in real time reflective of kind of where we are in the bear market. So I think for us and other firms that can actually invest directly in the secondary markets, it's a great time to be buying. You want to buy low, we are low, and there's a lot of opportunities in all different areas, which we can get into later on. And I think on the private market side of things, valuations have dropped quite a bit. I would say on average, valuations have dropped maybe 50 to 70% from where they were in the bull markets. And so I think for a lot of firms right now, they're focusing on seed stage. But for us, Pantera, since we're multi-stage, we're actually more interested in Series A and Series B valuations, where they're at the same sort of level that pre-seed and seed valuations are in the bull market. So for us right now, we are being very, very concentrated in getting into rounds that we think are very heavily discounted. And I think the other thing that is really interesting right now too is basically secondaries. So there's a lot of firms right now, or a lot of employees and early investors that actually want a bit of liquidity right now, especially with what's going on in the global markets. So secondaries has been a very active strategy for a lot of firms to be able to get into these companies and also providing liquidity for those that are already inside these companies.
What's going to be the next catalyst for the next bull run?
Yeah, I think for us, I was just talking about this with a few folks. I mean, this is the first time where we had a bear market in the middle of a recession, something that's happening in a global macro sense. So I think, as you sort of seen today, rates have stayed the same. And I think once rates go down a little bit, that will, be helpful for people to kind of move their capital into more speculative investments or into other asset classes. I also think that the Bitcoin halving that's happening next year, if you look at Bitcoin halving, every single time that it happens, there seems to be a bit of a push in the Bitcoin market, which tends to draw a lot of the other tokens, Ethereum and other altcoins behind it. So I think those two things are potential catalysts in addition to, I think, what's happening outside of the US. There's a lot of regulatory positivity in Hong Kong, Singapore, Tokyo, and the Middle East. And so I think that that regulatory positivity will actually draw a lot more entrepreneurs, but actually a lot of institutional capital from those areas wanting to get into both on the public side of things and on the private side of things for cryptocurrency. So all those things together, I think, will hopefully push the market sometime next year.
So you invest in Series A and B. What verticals, what areas are the most interesting for investing now?
Yeah, I think for us, we take a look at what's kind of needed for the space right now. I think a lot of developers are wanting to come into this space, so they need a lot of developer tools to make it easier for them to build. So I led the Series A of Alchemy. Alchemy is now a $10.2 billion company, and so we want more of those types of companies. They're the leading developer platform, basically Amazon AWS for crypto, and so we want more companies building tools to make it very easy for developers to launch applications, make sure that they can get the data and insights from those applications, being able to get those applications across different platforms and make sure that they are very usable for the end customer. Outside of that, you guys have probably heard of what happened with FTX. I think there's still an area of basically onboarding people in a safe and compliant way into crypto, and then potentially even have them doing exchanges within even the US market. So we're looking at non-custodial exchanges and brokerages. And then outside of that, I think there's an interesting area outside the US where everyone knows how well USDC is. It's probably the killer use case of tokenized real world assets right now. So imagine being able to now tokenize stocks and other sort of income streams and be able to have that in a token that's freely tradable. Now that's really tough to do in the US, but outside of the US it is possible. And so we're starting to see tokenized real world assets hopefully becoming more mainstream outside the United States, especially in Hong Kong and Singapore.
What differentiates Pantera from other investment firms in your space?
Yeah, look, we've been doing it earlier than anybody else. It's been 10 years, so we've seen a lot of things. We've built up a lot of knowledge, expertise, and connections. So every single time we talk to an entrepreneur, they know that Pantera is here for the long term. We are mission driven. We're here to be your partners through thick and thin. And then of course now we've provided a lot of resources that are really specific to the crypto industry. On top of what normal VCs do, we focus on things around security, regulations, tokenomics, and governance. Those are things that you don't necessarily see other traditional VCs provide. So we're really flexing and trying to figure out like what are things that are very specific to crypto entrepreneurs right now and making sure that we can help them along the way.
It's interesting that you say that because in my mind, the private market valuation reset that we saw needed to happen.
Yes.
Valuations, it wasn't indicative of revenue flow, it wasn't indicative of governance,
yes.
to your point.
Yes.
There was no profitability and you were just getting crazy, I mean, everyone was a unicorn, getting crazy
yes.
valuations. Just because it was growth at any cost, right? So
exactly.
I think it's
a lot of
important
hype.
that at Pantera, you're also focusing on being an advisor and not just throwing money at these
Exactly.
companies.
Definitely. I mean, when we put in capital, we want to make sure that they can have a sustainable business model. And so we know that like certain types of tokens aren't going to be sustainable. We know that these companies need to create real businesses, real cash flow, and how that ties to the token is extremely important. A lot of times, like you have two different stakeholders. You have the token stakeholders, and you have the sort of like institutional capital, private investors in the equity of the company. And so now that companies are potentially having two sides of value accrual, it's really important to make sure that both sides are well taken care of. And so I think for us, like, it starts off with like investors being aligned right from the beginning to get both equity and tokens, and then of course, helping them figure out what is the best path to go to market, whether it's more on the equity side of things or whether it's more around sort of token incentivization, and then making sure that they're doing the right things to make sure that their community is happy.
If you're new to investing in crypto, if you want to kind of dip your toes into the space, what advice would you give them?
Nasdaq TradeTalks, that's a great way to learn
you
about
go.
crypto.
Thank you.
But I would say that like I have a newsletter called Veradittakit that has 30,000 subscribers. I think that's a great way to learn. But also just like, going on Twitter, and being able to like follow people that you really admire and use cases that you really enjoy. I think the first thing to really sort of understand is like, whether it's going on a blog or whether it's going on, other sorts of like CoinDesk or the block, whatever, but like figure out what sort of use cases really resonate to you, whether it's cross-border payments, whether it's tokenization of real-world assets, whether it's NFTs, and then figure out, which companies are, exciting to follow in those categories.
Of course, Masari has fantastic research, particularly
Masari
on the
has
institutional side.
exactly,
Yeah.
Especially on the institutional side. We actually use Masari for a lot of data governance,
Yeah.
etc. And so figure out which companies you want to follow, figure out the entrepreneurs behind them, and then just kind of like get into the flow of information.
Appreciate the insight. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks.
Of course.
And thanks for joining me. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.